In this video, I will try to survive 1,000 days in Minecraft Hardcore 1 block. I've already done some cool things so far, but what happened in this last episode once again surpasses everything that's happened before. I would say, let the 1,000 days begin. Friends of the Sun, I warmly welcome you to the 1,000 days in Minecraft Hardcore 1 block. The first thing I did was check to see if my final residents were still okay, which they obviously were. Then I looked around a bit at the spawn, where of course my pumpkin pies from the last few hundred days were still there. I destroyed the first small pumpkin pie island during the spawn construction, and up until now, I didn't have a dedicated island for my favorite food built. That's why I prepared a few items for a new island, for which I, among other things, farmed a little quartz, built an area with earth that would become grass, and finally I farmed a lot of oak wood and birch wood. So I had everything together, and after I found a place for the new pumpkin pie island, construction could begin. I finished it on the 906th night, which didn't look too bad. The next morning, while I was doing some quick work in camp, I accidentally dropped my netherite pickaxe. But luckily, I had almost finished building SpongeBob. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so nice. Well, I then briefly farmed a bit of cleanstone, which I then used to start building the substructure of the pumpkin pie island. It really wasn't that easy because the island wasn't necessarily round. But I was still happy with the end result, and now all that was missing was the interior design. To do this, I still had to farm a lot of birch wood, but once I had enough of it, I was able to start building the inner workings of the pumpkin pie. At the end of the day, the whole thing looked like this. But I still needed orange leather armor for the armor stands, so I jumped into the nether to get the leather I needed from the hoglins there. Back in the pumpkin pie, I then made the orange leather armor and used it to equip the 2 armor stands, which now just look like pumpkin men. At least I think so. Well, now I was done with the interior, and the only thing that was missing was to beautify the outside of the meadow a bit, which I just did with coarse dirt and these trails. Then it was time to finally reach my goal from 108 day, which was to own 4 full pumpkin pie boxes, or 2 double boxes, which now took just over 800 days. But I was really proud of that. Sometimes you just have to be patient. Well, I was finally finished with the pumpkin pie island and can now present it to you. The next project I wanted to tackle was the Temple Island basement. There, you decided that I should build a small cave village. So I borrowed a little clean stone, which I then used to build a platform at the height where the village would ultimately stand. In the end, it looked like this, a little slope so that it looked a little more natural. I then used coarse dirt to duplicate a lot of soil that I wanted to turn into grass, because without sunlight, the grass wouldn't spread in the underground of the temple. I filled the entire surface of the giant box with it, then went into the cave and started placing the grass. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, so we had to farm some dirt again and wait until everything turned into grass. In the meantime, I went to my wood farm site and farmed oak wood there for 15 minutes. Then I prepared a few more little things for the construction and then snacked on all the grass blocks, which I then placed in the ground so that the whole area was now covered with grass. Since I had already prepared everything, I got the shulker boxes, went into the basement, and started building the cave village. As you can see, I then built a path from the outside up so that you can, of course, somehow get to the village. At first, I was very skeptical about how this would look, but I think it actually looks pretty nice. But of course, that's just me. Feel free to write in the comments what you think about it. I had now finished building the cave village, but of course the residents were still missing. So I built a railway line from Spur Island to the cave village, and when I wanted to transport the villagers, I just noticed that the villager breeder just wasn't working anymore. But luckily, I didn't need that many anyway, so I just took all the ones that were left with me. And in their new home, I gave them enough carrots so that they could reproduce on their own. Then I placed beds everywhere in the houses, and so now not only the cave village was complete, but the entire temple island. In order to finally be able to present this gem to you, I briefly dismantled the railway line and the fuel beacon, but now it was finally time. Well, what do you say to that? For me, it is my absolute favorite island in this one-lock world. Since my pickaxe was about to die again, I went to repair all my things. And then back home, I wanted to finish the next mega project, the giant SpongeBob. I also needed a lot of brown and black concrete, and when I went to my duper machine and just saw that it was running, I already knew roughly what to expect. I can't remember the last time I turned it on, but it was certainly some time ago, and the problem with this machine is that you can't leave it running for long. Otherwise, when you get to the end, Minecraft just shuts down, hangs up, because there are simply hundreds of thousands of items lying there on the floor. I tried my luck anyway, and jumped into the end, where exactly that happened. After hours of research, I came to the conclusion that I could delete the spawn chunk from the end in the files, which was my only option. So I did that, and thank God it worked. So my transformed ending wasn't lost after all, which I was really more than happy about. I rebuilt the collection station in the end, and then farmed black and brown concrete, which I then converted into normal concrete directly at the concrete onverter. This time, I was careful not to leave the duper running again for too long. With everything concrete, I then started building SpongeBob. In the end, I ran out of black and brown concrete, so I farmed it again for 20 minutes. But then I was able to place all the remaining glass and concrete, which meant I was able to finish the next mega project, the SpongeBob pixel art, on the 936th day. This project also simply meant having patience and perseverance. But I think all the work was worth it. I don't think everyone can claim to have a giant SpongeBob in their world. Something I've wanted to do for ages, but always put off, was building a proper beacon with all the ore blocks. The highest layer was supposed to be netherite blocks, for which I first got all the black powder from my farm, which was simply more than 2 shulker boxes. In order to be able to craft enough TNT, I turned on the sanduber, and in the meantime thought about how I should build the mega beacon. I then decided on this arrangement, with the most valuable thing, the netherite blocks, placed at the top. So I needed some fire resistance potions and then crafted all the TNT, namely 1015 stacks. So I was now ready for the ancient debris session in the nether. So for the next 80 minutes, I blew up one TNT-et after the other, hoping to find as much ancient debris as possible. Then, on 941 day, I ran out of TNT. But the yield was decent. Whole 101 pieces. I then had them melted and then crafted them into 25 pieces of netherite, which wasn't even 3 whole netherite blocks. With my remaining netherite, I was still able to craft the 3rd block. So now it was just a case of farming more 6 netherite blocks, which is 54 netherite or 216 ancient debris. So I stood at the creeper farm for a quarter of an hour to figure out whether it would even work out, because I would still need a lot of TNT. The yield after a quarter of an hour was about half a shulker box of black powder. After a quick calculation, I knew that it should be easy anyway, so this time I stood on Carpeter Creeper Farm for a full 50 minutes, which ultimately gave me 50 stacks of gunpowder. From these, I crafted 9 stacks TNT again, with which I was able to tackle the second long netherite session on the 946th day. So I spent the next 50 minutes in the nether again, where I ended up with a yield of 100 pieces of ancient debris. I also had these melted, from which I was able to craft the next 3 netherite locks. So 2/3 were now done. For another hour, namely until the 953 tag, I stood AFK at the creeper arm again, which allowed me to craft more 7 stacks of dynamite, with which I farmed 49 ancient debris for another 40 minutes. Of course, that wasn't enough, but since I spent the last 6 hours just doing that, I wanted to do something different again. Of course, the mega beacon also needed its own space, and that's why I wanted to build its own island for it. It was quite difficult for me to choose a suitable place for it, but once I decided on the 956th day, construction could begin. As you can see, I had already placed all the ore blocks. All that was missing was the most valuable layer, the netherite blocks. So one last time I had to stand AFK at the creeper farm for 3/4 of an hour and then craft almost 6 stacks of TNT. After brewing a few fire resistance potions, I went to the nether, where I was able to mine the last ancient debris on the 962 day. Back at home, I crafted the remaining netherite blocks, of which I finally had 9 pieces, which I then proudly placed at the top of my mega beacon. That was a really nice feeling, I tell you. And after I placed the beacon and selected Strength 2, not only did I feel stronger, but I was also happy that I had gone through with this project too. Next on the to-do list was finally finishing my zoo. Of course, there were still a few mobs missing, so I took all of my spawn eggs and sorted them out until I had my 14 remaining mobs together. So I started preparing the things for this, for which I first wanted to make a Silk Ouch XT for mushroom blocks, when suddenly a thunderstorm broke out. So I flew straight to my modified mob head arm and got the first mob head straight away. Then I just almost died. And unfortunately, the architecture didn't work so well that the farm was then immediately destroyed again. Well, I still got 2 zombie pots as a reward, which I added as interior decoration in my mob pot house in the small town. Then the preparation for the zoo continued, for which I, among other things, mined mushrooms and collected everything together. On the evening of 964, I was ready and the last counters could be built. Yes, they looked okay, but unfortunately they were still empty. So I traded a few name decks, renamed them after the mobs, and then we were ready to go. The new residents were a cat, a drowned man, a Louie, an iron golem, a stray, a dog, a mushroom cow, a snow golem, and a bee. Next in line was a zombified villager, but I obviously still had to get him. Unfortunately, since the villager breeder no longer worked, I had to get the villager using the oneblock, which I did for the next 10 minutes until Joe finally spawned. I then built a railway line to the front of the zoo, where I set up a small platform and waited for a zombie to spawn. When he finally showed up, I was able to take Joe upstairs on the train, where he was then zombified. I then had to quickly put a roof over him so he wouldn't burn. Until night fell again, I dismantled the railway line again, took care of the remaining name tags, and brought the remaining mobs to the zoo, namely a dolphin, a llama, a phantom, and a wandering trader. But then it was night again, and the zombified villager was allowed into his new home. I then quickly dismantled the small device and was done with the zoo, at least with the mobs. I couldn't leave the zoo standing like that. I had to polish it up a bit. And so I started to dismantle the cobblestone in front of it and build a border with smooth stone. That looked a little better, but of course I had to make the other sides and the back more attractive. So I built the rough border and then started building a subtle pattern. I then ran out of stone, so I farmed it briefly, got a few lava buckets, and then threw it in the oven. I also wanted to use some quartz for the outside walls, so I looked into the nether and farmed some quartz there for a few minutes. I then tested whether it would look halfway okay, which it actually did. So now, it was time for me to farm some quartz, which I did for the next half hour, where it all came together in the end. With that, I started building the first side, and when I was finished and decided to continue building it, I continued directly on the other side. Unfortunately, I not only ran out of quartz, but also the shroom lights, which I really wanted to install. So I had to farm quartz and shroom lights again for half an hour. But on the 977 day, I was back home and was able to continue with the walls of the zoo. I was almost finished. Only a few shroom lights were missing. But I quickly got these in the nether and then finished building the zoo. It may look a bit strange, but I find it kind of funny. Well, I still had to repair the sand cabin, and then the zoo was finally finished. The next thing I planned to do was build myself. I've always wanted to do that, and so I prepared the blocks for it, for which I added a little gray and light gray concrete to the duper, which I then immediately turned into normal concrete. Then I was faced with the big decision of where to build myself. After much consideration, I decided on a location where construction could begin. Yes, this is what the end result looked like. And if you're just watching the film, then my shop has actually already gone online where you can get my skin for real. Friends of the Sun, I'm telling you, look forward to it. It's going to be really nice. Well, I also think it's extremely cool to have it in my Minecraft world. Another thing I absolutely had to do was complete the aquarium with 100 fish. In addition, I traded really hard with the villagers over the next few days. On the one hand, to buy the fish myself, but on the other hand, to buy the ones with 50 name tags, which made up the majority of the emeralds. Of course, I had to rename each name tag, which also cost an anvil or two. In order to be able to trade more, I also went to my gold XP farm in the Nether, where I looted all the gold, which amounted to around 80 gold blocks. This meant I was able to trade everything together even quicker, which I finally finished on the 984 day. Now it was just a matter of releasing all the fish into the huge aquarium and renaming them, until at the very end, the 100 fish was added to the aquarium. 100 fish are really quite a few, and I think it's pretty cool to have so many fish in my aquarium. The only thing that would have been cooler is if there were more tropical fish in here. But you can't have everything. Finally, a wandering trader spawned again, and I still had to take a llama to the zoo. So I built a path away from the zoo to my cobblestone farm cube, where I then put a llama in a minecart and sent the zoo to my new home. Then I dismantled the path again and renamed the foxes Tadeus and Patrick according to your wishes. Tadeus is misspelled, but whatever, I still like the names. Next, I wanted to decorate the city with a few trees, which I did all night long, and then I placed grass and flowers everywhere outside. That looked a little better, and I then wanted to clean up the rest, where I found a lot of stacks of grass blocks in one of the boxes, which really annoyed me because I've always had a lot of grass blocks in the past. Had to farm. Well, I cleaned up all the shenanigans and corrected little things here and there. I also made the substructure uniform underneath. Then the city was finally complete, which I was extremely happy with. The next thing on my list was to build the last animal islands. First, it was the llama's turn, and so I got a little cleanse stone, and on the 987 day, the building could begin. Unfortunately, there was something wrong with the replay mod, so there is no time-lapse here. Luckily, the building wasn't too big, and I finished it in the 988 night, which I was quite happy with. Of course, I also brought 2 llamas to their new home, and the llama island was finished. Next, it was the turn of the polar bear, for whom I got a lot of snow, chose the place, and started building. As you can see, another small island, but this time in white and with a small igloo. I took the polar bear to its new home and the penultimate island was done. The last in line were the pandas, so I looked for a good place for them and built their own island for them too. Then I wanted to transport the 2 colleagues over, but unfortunately, one panda fell down. Well, when the one panda was in its new home, this island was also closed, and so I was now faced with the decision of what to do with the remaining mobs on my very first animal island. I then simply let them fly a bit and dismantled the entire structure. In the end, this was all that was left. The 100 Days book. I didn't want to just leave this artifact hanging here, so I thought of a very special place for it. I attached it to the ceiling of my temple, where it will now reside. Now I was finally finished with the animal islands, and I'm incredibly happy with how the whole thing looks. Then I collected all of my farm produce one last time and sorted them, among other things. Since I've already farmed countless stacks of iron blocks over the last almost 1,000 days, I wanted to do something with them. Since I was actually very sure that I would survive the 1,000 days, I decided to build exactly that. The 1,000 days. So I started building huge numbers with the iron blocks, but unfortunately, something was wrong with the replay bot again. So there's no time lapse here either. Well, I placed a brutal amount of iron blocks until the 996 tag. The end result looked like this, and I think it looks very powerful. The 1,000 days weren't too far away. What I wanted to do now was to prepare a fireworks show for the 1,000 day. And so I crafted tons of different fireworks stars with different effects and colors. To do this, I had to briefly farm some coal at my wither skeleton farm, and when I ran out of gunpowder, I started building the structures for the show. Unfortunately, it didn't work. That's because I still had to craft the fireworks stars into rockets, which unfortunately I had completely forgotten about. Since I no longer had any black powder, I stood at my creeper farm until 998 night, with the black powder of which I could now craft anything into rockets. I then packed all of these into the dispensers, and after tidying things up here and there, I still had to do one more thing. Make an updated map. So I crafted some cards and activated them all, which I then hung up in one of my houses in the city, where I have to say that a lot has changed from the old card. Since it was already the 1,000 day, I took another look at all the things I had created in that long time. Starting with the city, the main island, the villager island, the farm cubes, the zoo, SpongeBob, the animal islands, the transformed Ent, and last but not least my temple island, which was my favorite project of all. All of this was created within the last 1,000 days, although that wasn't even all. Here I have to say a quick thank you to every single viewer. Without you, none of this would have happened. You have no idea how much it means to me, whether you're a silent viewer or not, that you watch my videos. A big thank you. But then, it was time for deportation. The fireworks started, and on the one hand I was a little sad that this project was coming to an end. But on the other hand, I was extremely proud that I made it to 1,000. I even managed the day. So one last time I can say, that's it. I survived 1,000 days in Minecraft Hardcore 1 block without dying.